The desert wind outside the Riyadh palace carried the weight of old empires, some dying, some pretending they still ruled the world. Inside, beneath chandeliers that glowed like captive suns, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman waited with the confidence of a man who believed money could bend any nation, any leader, any destiny. But today, he was meeting someone who didn't fit into his calculations. The doors opened. Traoré walked in. Not with the stiffness of a politician, but with the quiet, controlled stride of a soldier who had seen the world try to break him and fail. MBS expected hesitation. Instead, Traoré's gaze cut through the golden room like a blade through silk. MBS smirked first. He always smirked first. "Captain Traoré," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Africa is entering a new era. And I intend to invest $1 trillion into it. Imagine what we could build together." It was supposed to impress. It was supposed to overwhelm. It was supposed to make every African leader pause, swallow pride, and smile gratefully. Traoré didn't pause. He let the words echo, then die. "$1 trillion is a big number," Traoré replied calmly. "But Africa is not a store. And Burkina Faso is not on sale." For the first time, a flicker, just a flicker, broke through MBS's confidence. He had expected negotiation. He had expected enthusiasm. He had not expected defiance. "You misunderstand," MBS said, leaning forward. "This is opportunity. Partnership. Prosperity. Money opens every door." Traoré shook his head slowly. "That is where you're wrong. Money opens the doors built by colonizers. But Africans are building their own doors now, and locking out anyone who comes to buy our dignity." The room fell silent. Servants froze. Advisors swallowed. Even the air felt like it stepped back to watch. "Do you think Africa is for sale?" Traoré finally asked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it hit the palace harder than any explosion. MBS straightened, eyes narrowing. He was starting to realize that this wasn't a meeting. It was a confrontation. And the man across from him wasn't here to ask for money. He was here to end the era where Africa bowed to anyone. The hall fell into a heavy silence as Mohammed bin Salman leaned back in his chair, the weight of $1 trillion promise hanging in the air like a veiled threat. Cameras flashed, advisors stiffened, and every diplomat present seemed to stop breathing for a moment. MBS spoke as if he were offering a favor to a struggling kingdom, not addressing the leader of a rising African power. But Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, just enough to show he was unimpressed. The Saudi prince continued, listing figures, investments, projections. $1 trillion, he said again, rolling the words slowly, as if expecting Traoré to be dazzled, grateful, overwhelmed. But Traoré saw something else in his tone: ownership. A belief that Africa must always be bought, never respected. A belief that money outweighs sovereignty. A belief that power can be purchased. So Traoré leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes locked directly on MBS. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in around the prince. $1 trillion, Traoré said quietly, is what you offer when you think the other side is desperate. The Saudi delegation shifted uneasily. Traoré continued, but Africa is not desperate. Not anymore. He reminded MBS of something no one in that room dared to say aloud, that Africa's value didn't come from foreign money but from African ownership, African resources, African decisions. "You think Africa is for sale," Traoré said, his voice carrying across the hall. "But you're talking to a generation that doesn't bow, doesn't beg, and doesn't sell its future." An advisor tried to interrupt, but Traoré raised a hand without breaking eye contact. "If you came here to buy influence," he said, "you came to the wrong century." A murmur spread through the hall, shock, admiration, disbelief. MBS's confident posture cracked for the briefest second. And that single moment was enough for everyone to understand, this meeting was not going the way he expected. The Saudi delegation stiffened as Traoré leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, not with anger, but with the kind of calm that made powerful men nervous. MBS had just finished outlining his vision, $1 trillion investment, massive infrastructure projects, and long-term cooperation. It sounded generous. It sounded historic. It sounded like the same colonial song, played with gold-plated instruments. Traoré tapped his finger on the table, once. The sound echoed like a drumbeat through the hall. "Your Highness," he began, his voice low but razor-sharp, "you speak as if Africa is a marketplace. A trophy." He paused. "But Africa is a home. And a home is not bought." MBS forced a smile. "General Traoré, you misunderstand. This is partnership." "Partnership?" Traoré repeated. "Partnership means both sides stand tall. What you offer sounds like Africa kneeling." A murmur spread through the Saudi entourage. Some shifted uncomfortably, others glared. MBS stayed silent, studying Traoré the way a king might study an unpredictable warrior, someone who broke rules without fear of consequences. Traoré leaned forward. "$1 trillion, he said slowly, "is a large number for a man. But for a continent? For a people? For a civilization older than your kingdom? It is nothing." The room froze. "You don't buy Africa," Traoré continued, "you respect it. And if you don't, Africa will teach you respect." MBS's expression changed, not to anger, but to something rarer, hesitation. For the first time, he realized this wasn't a negotiation. This was a warning. Africa's new era was not one of silent leaders and obedient governments. It was one of men like Traoré, unbought, unbroken, and unafraid. "Your Highness," Traoré finished, "if you truly want to work with us, then bring respect, not a price tag. Because Africa is not for sale. But its enemies," he let the sentence hang, sharp as a blade. "Its enemies always pay." The message was clear. The balance of power in the room had shifted, and everyone knew who now held it. The moment MBS mentioned $1 trillion, the entire hall stirred, advisors whispering, journalists scrambling for angles, security stiffening. It was the kind of number meant to overwhelm, to blind, to silence. But Traoré didn't blink. He watched the prince with an expression that was not anger, not fear, not even skepticism. It was something far more dangerous, amusement. MBS leaned forward, lowering his voice as if offering a secret deal. "With this money," he said, "Africa could finally rise. Think of the cities, the ports, the power grids. You need partners. Let us help you modernize." Traoré didn't respond immediately. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and calculated. Then he spoke, soft enough to force everyone to lean in. "Modernize," he said. "Do you think Africa is waiting for a prince to rescue it?" MBS's smile faltered. Traoré continued, "You offer $1 trillion as if it buys you a continent. As if our people are desperate. As if our future is something that can be bought like oil wells in the desert." He pointed at the folders stacked on the table, pages of projections, contracts, proposed stakes in mining zones. "You came with plans, but not respect. With money, but not understanding." A Saudi advisor tried to chime in, but Traoré raised a hand. "No. Let him hear this." The room fell silent again. "Africa is not a store," Traoré said. "And I am not a cashier." Lightning flashed across the windows behind him, casting his silhouette across the table, a reminder that storms do not ask permission to arrive. "You think $1 trillion is power," Traoré said. "But power is knowing when to refuse it." MBS leaned back, fingers tapping the table in irritation. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not kings, not presidents, not allies. But Traoré wasn't like the others, and everyone in the room could feel it. "Africa rises on its own terms," Traoré said. "And if you want a partnership, a real one, then come without a leash in your hand." The words hit harder than any insult. Even Saudi officials lowered their eyes. In that moment, the power in the room shifted. Not because of armies, or wealth, or prestige. But because Traoré had spoken a truth no money could bury. And MBS realized something he had never confronted. You can buy loyalty. You can buy silence. But you cannot buy Ibrahim Traoré. The meeting room thickened with silence as MBS leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm on the polished table. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed his offer was irresistible. "General Traoré," he said calmly, $1 trillion can change continents. It can build cities, armies, industries. Africa could rise faster than ever before, with our partnership. But Traoré didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. Instead, he let the silence speak first. A leader who knows his worth doesn't rush his reply. When he finally looked up, his voice cut through the room like a blade. "Partnership," he repeated. "Or ownership?" MBS froze for a moment. Most leaders, presidents, ministers, diplomats, softened their tone around the Saudi prince. Traoré didn't. He spoke to him as an equal. No, not equal, as a man protecting something sacred. "You speak of money," Traoré continued, "as if it gives you keys to a continent. But Africa is not a shop. We are not shelves where wealthy nations place their ambitions." He leaned forward, eyes locked on the prince. "You think $1 trillion lets you enter Africa? My soldiers guard the door. My people decide who enters." The statement hit harder than any threat. The prince adjusted his collar, an involuntary reaction, barely noticeable but enough to reveal tension. "No disrespect," MBS said slowly, "but you underestimate what such an investment can do for your nation." Traoré shook his head. "I don't underestimate money," he said. "I underestimate those who think money rules us." A minister sitting near MBS whispered urgently into the prince's ear. MBS waved him away. He wanted this confrontation. He wanted to win it. But Traoré wasn't playing his game. He was challenging the very foundation of it. "Africa rises on African terms," Traoré said. "Not with chains that glitter. Not with deals that look like gifts but feel like graves." MBS straightened his posture. "You reject my offer?" Traoré smiled, slowly, confidently, like a man who'd already won. "I reject the idea," he said, "that Africa must be bought to be respected." "Your move, Prince." MBS's smile thinned as Traoré stepped closer, the room suddenly feeling too small for two men who refused to kneel. Advisors around them went silent, their pens frozen mid-air, their screens untouched, as if any sudden movement might trigger an explosion neither kingdom nor republic was ready to contain. Traoré lowered his voice, not out of fear, but because a whisper from a fearless man cuts deeper than a scream. "Do you know what $1 trillion buys?" he asked calmly. "Influence. Silence. Obedience. All the things you're used to." MBS stiffened. No one talked to him like that, not CEOs, not generals, not heads of state. But Traoré continued, unbothered. "But Africa doesn't trade dignity for digits. And I am not a leader for sale. Not to you. Not to the West. Not to anyone." The Crown Prince's fingers tapped against his chair, slow, irritated, calculating. "You misunderstand me," he said. "This is an investment. A partnership. A future we can share." Traoré shook his head. "A future you want to shape," he corrected. "A future you want Africa to enter on your terms. But Africa has its own terms now. And its own spine." MBS leaned forward. "You think you can build a new world without us? Without Gulf money? Without global networks?" Traoré didn't blink. "We're already building it," he replied. "While you're still trying to buy your place in it." A murmur rippled across the delegates seated behind MBS. Some glanced at their phones. Some pretended not to hear. Some stared at Traoré as if watching history push an empire back with nothing but a sentence. Then Traoré delivered the line that broke the last thread of MBS's composure. "If you really want to help Africa, stop trying to own it." The words landed heavier than any accusation. MBS's jaw tightened. His advisors shifted, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation burn itself out. Traoré didn't wait. He walked past the Saudi delegation as if walking past the idea of African submission itself. And for the first time that day, MBS looked at him not as a leader to negotiate with, but as a force he could neither buy nor bend. The tension in the room thickened as Traoré leaned back in his chair, studying MBS with an expression that was neither impressed nor intimidated. The Saudi crown prince shifted slightly, unused to being looked at like an equal, much less like someone who had to earn respect. Most leaders softened their tone in front of him. Traoré only sharpened his. "Let me be clear," MBS said, steepling his fingers as if delivering a royal decree. $1 trillion isn't an offer many nations get. With that kind of investment, we reshape Africa together. You get development. We get partnership. Everyone wins. His smile tightened. But only if you understand the magnitude. Traoré didn't blink. Africa understands magnitude better than anyone, he replied calmly. We carried empires. We survived colonizers. We rebuilt from ashes you couldn't imagine. Don't lecture me on magnitude. MBS's eyes narrowed. I'm extending a historic opportunity. And I'm extending a warning, Traoré countered, leaning forward. If you come with respect, Africa welcomes you. If you come with ownership in your mind, you'll lose more than money. The crown prince's facade cracked for a second. Not from anger, but from the shock of someone who couldn't figure out whether he was being threatened or taught a lesson. Traoré continued, his voice low and unwavering. $1 trillion doesn't buy Africa. It doesn't buy loyalty. It doesn't buy dignity. This continent isn't for sale. Not to the West. Not to Europe. Not to America. And not to you. A silence fell so heavy even the walls seemed to listen. MBS exhaled slowly, trying to regain the upper hand. You're bold, he said. I'm African, Traoré replied. Boldness is our birthright. The room stayed quiet, because in that moment, it was clear who set the terms. In the dimly lit private lounge of the summit, the tension shifted from political to personal. MBS's ministers whispered to one another, trying to measure Traoré's patience like traders gauging the price of crude oil. But Traoré wasn't a commodity. His silence alone was heavier than any $1 trillion offer. And MBS felt it. You misunderstand me, MBS said finally, raising a hand as if calming a restless crowd. Saudi Arabia respects Africa. But investment requires vision. We want to help you modernize, energy, roads, technology. This money is opportunity, not ownership. Traoré leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes steady, unbothered, unreadable. Opportunity, he repeated. That's what every empire said before Africa was looted. France said it. Britain said it. America said it. He paused. Now you say it. A flicker of annoyance crossed MBS's face. Burkina Faso is strong, he said. But no nation builds alone. Traoré didn't blink. We don't build alone, he replied. We build with Africans. Not buyers. MBS exhaled sharply. You think I'm trying to buy you? Traoré's voice dropped, calm, sharp, unshakable. You offered $1 trillion and expected my gratitude. That is not partnership. That is a leash made of money. The room shifted. Even the air seemed to stiffen. Advisors exchanged uneasy glances, none dared intervene. MBS leaned back, studying him like a chess player who suddenly realized he misjudged the board. And if Africa refuses, he asked. Traoré's response was immediate. Then Africa remains Africa, unowned, unbroken, and unbought. MBS's jaw tightened. Be careful, Ibrahim. The world doesn't fear stubborn men. Traoré stood slowly, adjusting his uniform as if preparing for a ceremony rather than a confrontation. No, he said, the world fears men who cannot be purchased. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the air dared to move. Traoré turned toward the door but paused, giving MBS one final truth that cut deeper than any threat. You came here thinking Africa needed your trillion. But you leave knowing you needed Africa's permission. He walked out. And for the first time in years, Mohammed bin Salman had no reply. The silence after Traoré's challenge was explosive. MBS shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing, the weight of $1 trillion humiliation settling on his shoulders. He attempted to regain his footing with a diplomatic tone, but the tremor behind his words betrayed him. General Traoré, he said carefully, Saudi Arabia is offering partnership, growth, opportunity, and stability. We are not your enemies. Traoré leaned in, his voice low enough to feel like a blade. You don't need to be an enemy to be a threat. All it takes is thinking Africa is cheap. The Saudi delegation froze. Cameras from international media caught every breath, every twitch of discomfort. MBS forced a smile, the kind leaders wear when they know the ground beneath them is cracking. You misunderstand. We want to invest. We want to help build a new era. Traoré shook his head. If you want to help, respect sovereignty. If you want partnership, treat Africa as equal. If you want access, earn it. The room erupted. Not with applause, not yet, but with frantic murmurs. Experts whispered to each other, stunned that a leader from West Africa was speaking to the most powerful man in the Middle East as if he were just another negotiator, not a giant with unlimited financial firepower. MBS straightened. You're playing a dangerous game, he said quietly. Traoré didn't blink. Dangerous for who? That question hit like artillery. It wasn't arrogance, it was a warning. A reminder that the old world, where money ruled and Africa obeyed, was dying in front of them. The atmosphere shifted. African diplomats sat taller. Journalists scrambled for headlines. Western ambassadors whispered nervously, because if MBS couldn't buy Africa, then maybe no one could. Maybe this young captain truly was reshaping the global balance one confrontation at a time. MBS exhaled slowly, disappointment heavy in his voice. We came here with generosity, he said. Yet you refuse. Traoré answered with fire. Africa refuses chains disguised as generosity. No one dared breathe as he stood, placing both hands firmly on the table, claiming the room with a single motion. We will build our continent, he declared. Not with your $1 trillion, but with our own strength. The world had witnessed something rare, a titan's offer rejected, a nation's dignity defended, and a leader unshaken before power. MBS rose from his chair, but Traoré remained standing first. Symbolic, deliberate, dominant. For a brief moment, the two men faced each other not as representatives of nations, but as embodiments of two eras, one clinging to wealth and influence, the other fueled by defiance and liberation. General, MBS said, carefully measuring each syllable, if Africa rejects opportunity, the world will move on without you. Traoré stepped closer. Africa is the world's future. The only ones being left behind are those who still think they own it. The words detonated across the hall. Advisors on both sides tensed, sensing that negotiations had dissolved into something greater, an ideological battlefield. MBS inhaled sharply. You speak boldly, he said. But bold words don't build nations. Traoré smiled. Neither do billion-dollar chains. A wave of shock rippled across the audience. Even the translators paused, double-checking if they heard correctly. Traoré continued, voice firm, steady, unbreakable. You think $1 trillion can shape Africa's destiny? Africa's destiny is already written, by Africans. MBS attempted to regain control. Money is power, Traoré. Traoré shook his head. Power is owning your land. Power is refusing to be bought. Power is standing for your people even when the world expects you to kneel. The room went silent again. Traoré walked toward the window overlooking the city skyline, hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a battlefield. "Look outside," he said without turning. "The world is changing. Empires fall. Markets crumble. Alliances shift. But Africa." He finally turned, eyes blazing. "Africa is rising. With or without your money." MBS seemed smaller now, not physically, but symbolically, dwarfed by the defiance of a man who came from a nation Western pundits dismissed as insignificant. And yet here he was, rewriting geopolitical rules with nothing but conviction. Traoré gave the final blow. "If you want partnership, come with respect. If you want ownership, go elsewhere. Africa is not for sale." He walked out, leaving the Saudi delegation stunned, journalists electrified, and the global stage forever altered. The legend of Ibrahim Traoré had grown again, this time not through war, but through a $1 trillion refusal the world would remember for decades.